This is our Mills Fleet Farm complex. Mills Fleet Farm is a Midwestern big box store. Brainerd, my hometown, is the home of Mills Fleet Farm. We have the biggest one in the world. It's a double size. Mills Fleet Farm, because I know you don't have them here in Calgary. When you walk in Mills Fleet Farm, here's the product mix. You have auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns and ammo, camouflage lingerie. That's the product mix. We love Mills Fleet Farm. It's a huge success in Minnesota. This is our 20-acre Mills Fleet Farm. There's also an auto dealership there on the north, and on the west, a gas station. This is the most valuable piece of property in the entire area. When these people show up at a meeting, we just stop the meeting and ask them, like, what do you need from us, right? This is 20 acres of our core downtown. If you've ever seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my hometown. Most of the second and third stories here are unoccupied. Most of the first stories struggle to keep businesses. In my lifetime, there have been no new buildings built, but lots of them that have been torn down and now are parking lots. So this is not a place that when visitors come, we take them to. This is a kind of a sad little downtown. When we look out on the edge of the town, at the best of the best, the most valuable piece of property, what we see is a total value of $0.6 million per acre, a huge sum of money. But when we go to our core downtown, 20 acres, the same area, just a different style and approach to development, what we see is a wealth that is 78% greater. How much did we spend to get that stuff out on the edge? Well, we built the bypass, it was a couple $100 million, tens of millions of dollars of sewer and water expansions, millions of dollars of frontage roads and backage roads. When I was an engineer, I actually designed that backage road back there. That was $2.6 million for that. How much did my generation spend to get that wealth in the downtown? That was wealth that my great-great-grandparents and their peers built slowly and incrementally over time, and then bequeathed to us as an endowment of sorts that would just continue to pay back decade after decade after decade. We've slowly milked it down. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? The whole theme of this conversation today is about resiliency. What happens when that place is gone? It will at some point, right? I mean, we don't have the Hudson Bay Company today. Every company has a business cycle, whether it's 5 months or 5 years or 50 years. That will no longer be a Mills Fleet Farm. What comes next? I don't know. But we do know that whatever it is that comes next will not be as high on the economic food chain as this, right? This is the peak. There's 132 different properties in that core downtown, that picture on the right. What happens when one of them loses a tenant or someone goes out of business? What happens when, in our infinite wisdom, we figure out that we don't have enough retail, but we have too much office? Or not enough office, but too much residential? Well, these buildings are very flexible. They're highly adaptable. They become many, many things. When we talk about resiliency, we also add to that conversation financial productivity, the ability to hold your value in good times and bad, through decline. But a big part of that is the adaptability and the flexibility of this building style. There's a reason our ancestors, and I say that in the largest sense of the word, there's a reason our ancestors built around the world in this style. It is highly flexible, highly adaptable, highly productive, and very, very resilient. This is a pattern we see everywhere around the world. When we model cities, we see the same thing showing up again and again. I'm going to give you a snapshot of 3 different communities. These are maps that a good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy and his group at Urban 3 put together. What I'm going to show you right now is financial productivity in the 3rd dimension. If you think of a farmer going out and planting seed across a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we say that's the most productive part of the field. It's where we get the greatest bushels per acre or what have you. So what I'm going to show you right now is value per acre. What properties are generating the most wealth per acre? This is Buffalo, New York. For those of you that have never been to Buffalo, New York has a great history of being really one of the premier cities in all of the world. But after World War II, went into just steep decline. Buffalo, New York has lost population every census since 1940. This is a continual downward trend. There was an update actually 2 weeks ago, 2016 update. They were hoping this was the first year they were going to gain population. Nope, they lost again. Right now, if you would move to Buffalo, New York, you can buy a house for $1 if you agree to live there for 5 years and fix it up. So this is a rather desperate place. Yet, when we look at Buffalo, New York, can you tell me where their traditional downtown is? And not only, despite the decline, despite the neglect, is it a massive repository of wealth, but it absolutely dwarfs everything else around it. It dwarfs everything we have built subsequent. This is the same kind of style we see in cities everywhere of all sizes. Here's a little city in upstate New York of about 60,000. We see the same pattern. Here's a little city by where I live, about 1,500. When I first went there, they said, Chuck, we've got some great stuff happening out here. We've got some great stuff happening over there, but these neighborhoods here are terrible. We've got to do something to get this stuff taken care of, maybe tear it down and get it rebuilt. And then we showed them where all their wealth was, in those poor neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods where all the poor people live. A good friend of mine, Joe and I and his team were invited to come to Lafayette, Louisiana to help them understand essentially this question, why they're going broke. Their mayor at the time, they have a tradition, they have term limits there. So the mayor was at the end of the term limits, and part of their tradition is that when you're on your way out, you raise taxes, because that's the only time you can raise taxes. So he was getting all kinds of pressure from the Chamber of Commerce and other groups to raise taxes to put that money towards roads, and particularly to building new roads. But the city of Lafayette had a $50 million road backlog, and their annual road budget was $1 million. But every year they were adding $2.5 million to their backlog list. So even if they tripled the amount of money they were spending on roads, they were still going to wind up going in the hole every year. In other words, even in the wildest proposal that anyone could ever consider, they still weren't eating into this backlog that they had. He said, there's a problem here, and I know there is, and I want you guys to help me explain it. So we spent a lot of time working with the city and their staff to dig through all of their departments, all their revenues, all their expenses. We plotted these up in many different ways to look at them and digest them and understand them. And in totality, we came up with this map here. This map here is a map of the expenses and the revenues mashed together for the city. I do apologize. This is not my map, it's someone else's map, so I can't change it. Since I've been presenting this, I've come to it's such a powerful map that I have to include it, but I did not realize in my ignorance that there are people who are red-green colorblind. So if you're red-green colorblind, you are just seeing a blob. If you're not red-green colorblind, you're seeing red, which are properties that are, in an accounting standpoint, in the red, right, cash flow negative, and green, properties that are in the green, cash flow positive. For everybody's sake, I'm going to go through this map kind of slowly and show you what's going on so that people who are not seeing the color will see it as well as everybody else. There's a big spike kind of right in the middle there. The spike it goes to the high parts of the map. That is a green spike. That is in accounting sense, the most profitable neighborhood in the city. It's a new urbanist development called River Ranch. By new urbanist, what I mean is it's traditional building styles with modern financing techniques. So tight neighborhoods, narrow streets, but everything built all at once to a finished state. Right now, financially, it's doing really, really well. It's an open question how it will do in the future. The way we build all at once to a finished state means that 20, 25 years from now, Everybody's roof in this neighborhood is going to go bad at the same time. Everybody's driveway is going to fail at the same time. Everybody's appliances are going to need to be replaced at the same time. Without a natural renewal mechanism, in other words, without the ability to go in and invest in properties that go into decline and intensify them incrementally, what we see historically is that suburbs enjoy one generation of essentially prosperity, another generation of stagnation, and then a rapid fall off and decline because of the way they're built and financed. It's unclear whether this will happen to River Ranch, but right now it's very, very successful. To the east of that, to the right of that, there's an area that is all green right in the middle. So this right in the middle is all green. That is their core downtown. Now, I described my core downtown as being kind of a sad place. I would put Lafayette maybe even a little bit below that. Lafayette's downtown is not a place you would bring people to who are coming to visit you in Lafayette. It's a college town. There's a bunch of dive bars. There's some great Zydeco music, so I'm not going to diss it too much. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, but it's a place that has struggled. They know that, and they're working on it. But financially, right now, it's absolutely killing it. It's doing fantastic. To the east of that, there is a crescent of green that runs from up here down through here. There's a crescent of green neighborhoods that run through there. What is that? Those are the poor neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods where all the poor people live. Those are the neighborhoods where when we went there to work, the city staff said when we were looking at getting an Airbnb, don't go to those neighborhoods there. That's where the homicides happen. That's where the burglaries happen. Just stay out of that neighborhood. Everything else on here is red. All this stuff out on the edge. And by the way, the higher the line goes, the more they're in the red or the green. So you can see out on the far west there, really very intensely in the hole. On the south there's some properties that are very, very in the red. What's going on out there? What's that? Those are your big box stores, the mall, the strip mall, the drive-through restaurants. Those are the suburban subdivisions with the kind of windy streets and the dead-end cul-de-sacs. Those are the three-car garages with the attached home. That's what's going on out there. This map represents two subsidies, and they're two subsidies that are universal, that we see all over the continent, everywhere we've ever modeled, everywhere we've ever looked. Subsidy number one, poor neighborhoods subsidize affluent neighborhoods. That is a universal condition of our development pattern. Subsidy number two, future generations subsidize today's generation. The typical household in Lafayette today pays $1,500 in taxes to the city. Now, they pay taxes to the parish and the school district and a bunch of other, but just to the city alone, it's $1,500 for the median house. In order for the city to make good on every promise represented in this map, the median house taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. One out of every $5 that median family makes would need to be sent to the city just to maintain the stuff they have already built. That's never going to happen. And because it's never going to happen, future generations are going to struggle with some really, really difficult decisions. They're already struggling with it. They have a $50 million backlog of road maintenance. They have roads falling apart that they're not fixing. That problem is only going to get worse. And future generations are going to have to deal with this in a very intense way. Now, there's a city in North America that has dealt with this crisis or is in the process deeply of dealing with it, of deciding what neighborhoods we keep, what neighborhoods we let go, what we choose to maintain, what we don't. Does anybody know what city I'm talking about? Yes, Detroit, right? The fascinating thing about Detroit is that everybody has a narrative for Detroit. If you are a far left-wing nut job, you can explain Detroit perfectly in your lens. If you're a far right-wing nut job, you can explain Detroit perfectly in your lens. We all have a narrative to explain Detroit, and a lot of them are screwed up and warped. But we can smugly explain them and walk away, right? Detroit is greedy auto companies. Detroit is greedy unions. Detroit is corrupt politicians. Detroit is those people. Whatever your hang-up is, you can look at Detroit and describe it. But most importantly, what you can say is, we're not Detroit. Here's how I describe Detroit. Detroit got started doing this whole new experimental way of building 20 years ahead of everybody else. They arrived at the logical destination 20 years ahead of everybody else. They're just early. When we look at early 20th century, what we see is that Detroit was becoming the motor city before the Great Depression. They were running the highways through the middle of the city. They were spreading things out. They were growing horizontally. They were creating new neighborhoods out on the edge. They were depopulating their cities and spreading things out. And when we got through the Depression and World War II, what we did is we looked and we said, well, who's got this stuff figured out? Who's figured out how to use the automobile to create prosperity? Who's figured out how to use this to do things well? Well, Detroit has. And in many ways, Detroit became the model that we have all subsequently followed. Detroit is just early. We all are going to deal with this. We're all going to deal with the idea that when you take a city and you spread it out over a broad area, it becomes really, really expensive over the long term to service and maintain. We in this room can lead a conversation, not necessarily in like we have the solution, but a different understanding of what is actually going on. Because the one thing that we can learn from Detroit is that a dysfunctional internal dialogue of what is happening to us is the most destructive thing of all. I want you to think about the way these buildings look, because it gives us a clue as to how we can start to piece things together in a really productive way. Here's a Kmart, a big box store. These are in North Carolina, but they could be anywhere. I mean, we see the same numbers basically everywhere we look. This Kmart, $384,000 an acre. Here's a Walmart, $967,000 an acre. These are looked at as like huge investments, yet when we go to other parts of town, what we see is an old abandoned warehouse that was turned into a supper club, $5 million an acre. And my favorite building of all time, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. Now here's the question that we face. And here's the question I want to put to all of you. Do you have the intelligence, the wherewithal, the capability to build something as intricate and sophisticated as Jimmy's Pizza? Because if you do, and if that's all you can do, look at the wealth that we can start to create. When we step back and we look at our cities and we look at all the gaps, all the room, all the area, when we get out of our cars and stop, traveling at high speeds and experience the city at low speeds, what we realize is that North American cities are nothing but gaps. And gaps for us, we have to start obsessively thinking about them as opportunities. And the opportunity that comes in a gap is a building like Jimmy's Pizza. It's a fantastic building. As an engineer, I look at this and I say, it takes up 20 feet of street. Look at the little bit of sidewalk I have to put in for it. It's already there. Look at the little bit of pipe that needs to sustain that. It's already there. When we go look at these places here, yes, when I worked for a consulting firm, these were great places, right? Because we could get design contracts to build millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure. This was all wonderful. But when we actually look at this, all this is already there. We just got to maintain it. We just got to take care of it. Where's the wealth going to come from doing that? We almost have a hang-up in that Jimmy's Pizza is beneath us, right? We almost have a hang up in that, like, we can't think that small because it's beneath us. We're greater than that. Our ambition should be much higher than that. Yet when we step back and actually look at where we're at today, this type of thing is the first increment. It's the first increment of something greater. Daniel Burnham said, make no little plans, right? It's become like the mantra of the planning profession. But we've taken that and we've changed it. And instead of make no little plans, we've changed it to take no little actions. But in Daniel Burnham's age, all the actions were little. The plans were huge. The actions were little. And that's what I'm trying to get you to see. We can actually build great places. We could build magnificent cities. We could build cities that are successful and prosperous, but we have to humble ourselves to be able to start small. One of the most inspiring stories along those lines for me comes from a little neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is one of these cities that shows up on the desperation index a lot with Detroit. Detroit and Memphis are often 1-2, 2-1 on all the lists you don't want to be on. Poverty rates, homicide rates, out-of-wedlock births. But Memphis has some amazing things going on. So does Detroit. Detroit, if you ever get a chance, Detroit's, to me, the most exciting city in North America right now. The innovation that's happening, the stuff that people are doing, it will blow your mind. Memphis is very much like that. And here on this little street, we had some people who were fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters in their own hands. This little street, Broad Avenue, used to be a streetcar stop. In the 50s, the city ripped out the streetcar lines. They ran a highway through the middle of the neighborhood. Without that foot traffic, without that streetcar traffic, these businesses just died. So these neighborhoods said, we're sick of decline. And they went out and they worked with the people who owned the buildings to get them swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They went out with paint and they put in their own bike lanes and they put in their own crosswalks. They invited businesses to come in for one weekend just to show the neighborhood what this place could look like. They had a clothier, they had a bike shop, they had an art gallery, they had an ice cream stand, they had a little taco stand. They didn't go get city permission. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They said, by the time anybody gets uptight with us, we're going to be gone anyway. Let's just go do this. And they went out and they did it. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that this is the greatest street in North America. It's not even the greatest street in Memphis, right? But it's a heck of a lot better than what was there. I wasn't out there for this project, but when I was there 6 months later, they brought me out here and they showed me this. When I was out there, every single storefront was occupied by a business. They had all been vacant before the project. When the landlord told me they were able to charge double the amount of rent for the last place than what they were asking for before the project. The city has since gone out and documented 18 new businesses, 32 new jobs, $12 million of property value appreciation. Total public investment, 0. Those are the opportunities that are sitting there for us if we just humble ourselves to think differently. That neighborhood with the Taco John's and the old and blighted block, I got in a lot of trouble in my hometown for bringing that to the attention of the world. I tried to bring it to attention in my hometown and nobody wanted to hear it, so I published it on our blog. And people started to talk about it all over the place. And the people in the city got really upset with me. This is what, working in your hometown. I grew up on the farm that my great-great-grandparents had homesteaded. So my family, it's one of these things where, like, in junior high, when you would meet a girl, you'd have to ask her who she's related to, because there's a decent chance you were somehow related. So before things got serious, you had to explore the family tree. So when I wrote that about Taco John's, understand that the head of the Economic Development Corporation is my second cousin. And the manager of Taco John's is another second cousin. They're on different parts of the family tree, but it makes family reunions awkward, right? So the pushback that I got is, okay, Mr. Smart Man, what would you do differently? You're so smart. You think we screwed up here. What would you have done with this blight? What would you have done with this decline? And so there was a group of friends of mine. We worked in this neighborhood with the Taco John's and the old and blighted block. It's right next to my office, and it's the neighborhood over from where I live. So this is right in the heart of my community. We spent a year just trying to understand this neighborhood. We would go out there and walk around during our lunch breaks. We would just go out, and one day we took a table and just set it up. We did this a few times, just set it up in the neighborhood in a parking spot. And just sat there and worked at that table for like 4 hours till our computers ran out of juice, just so we could watch what people did, just observe. We did everything we could to try to understand the neighborhood and then do little things to see how people responded. So we observed a woman walking through the ditch, pushing a stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? I don't have a car today. I need to get to the grocery store. It's not safe. I don't feel safe walking on the street, so I'm walking here. We saw the elderly woman walking in the middle of the street with a walker, climbing over mounds of snow. What are you doing? I have to get to the pharmacy today. I have to. The sidewalk's not shoveled, and there's no sidewalk over here anyway, so I have to walk here. We saw kids walking through the alleys on the way to school. During the rain with mud. Why are you guys walking back here? Well, my mom doesn't want us walking out on the street because the cars go by too fast, so they told us to walk here. So we would go out and we did things, like that one street where the kids weren't allowed to walk on. We went out and did a speed study, which is really easy to do. You just get a little, like a softball radar gun, go sit out there and write down how fast the cars are driving. And what we found is that the moms were right. 2 out of 3 cars that drove this street were going over the speed limit. So we said, what could be done here to slow things down? We don't have any money. We can't just throw money at this problem. We certainly don't have the city behind us. What do? We went out at 5 in the morning. A lot of softball references here. We took the chalk thing that you chalk a base path with in a softball game. We went out and we chalked in narrower lanes in the middle of the night. People got up in the morning, they started driving it, and they're like, oh, narrower lanes. We did it with chalk because I knew the city would freak out. And fortunately, it rained like in the afternoon that day, so it was all gone. I did not get in trouble for that one. But we did that, and then we went out and we did another speed study. And you know what we found? In the same 2-hour period that we studied before, just a week later, 2 hours, same time of day, same everything, we had 1 car out of almost 300 that passed through there that went over the speed limit. Everyone else drove slower. So we did things like this throughout the whole summer, just trying things. We realized that one of the problems in this neighborhood was that people didn't talk to each other. The neighborhood had been, over time, it was very walkable, but it had been reconfigured to where it was very nasty to walk, and not many people were out walking, and people didn't really meet their neighbors. And so we did things like scavenger hunts and block parties just to get people together. And at the end of a year, we put together this report for the city called Neighborhoods First, where we outlined 8 projects that the city could do that would start that incremental development process, that would signal to people that this is a neighborhood that is not going to be in decline, but is going to actually start going the other direction, as a way to attract investment, to start that incremental process going again. If you come to my session, it's not an advertisement, but there's a lot to choose from, I'm sure. But my next session, I'm actually going to go into depth on this process and this report. But let me just tell you what is contained in here. We have 8 projects that the city can do to make this neighborhood a little bit better. things that we discovered by observing where people struggled. Little things like put in a crosswalk over here, put in a bike lane here, plant a row of trees over here. My city is in the process right now. We're just finishing up a $14 million project to run sewer and water 2 miles out of town to our airport so that we can have a new business park out at the airport. Now, we already have a business park we built in the 90s. It's only half full, but this one would be oriented around the airport. We got a grant to do it. So there's all kinds of great economic development potential. That was sarcasm. Out on the edge of town. The total cost for our 8 projects, $16,700. What happens if we go out and spend $16,700 in a struggling neighborhood trying to make things a little bit better for people, and nothing good comes of it? Nobody appreciates it. Nobody uses it. It doesn't signal to anybody a change in direction, and nothing happens. Well, we're out $16,700, which is not a big deal, right? And we learned 8 things that don't work. Go try 8 more things next year. But I have a feeling that the things we recommend will work because we humbled ourselves. We went out and we said, I don't know the answer here. Let's observe where people are struggling and then ask, like, how do we deal with that? So we witnessed people walking here. I went to the city engineer and I said, I think you could use a sidewalk. Do you know what he said? Why would you say that, Chuck? Well, I don't know. There's a path through the ditch, you know? Maybe people are using it, right? It's really important for us to grasp because as an engineer, as a planner, I used to think I had a really stressful job. I would go to these meetings and the same people would show up and yell at me. Same people would show up and be upset and angry with me over things. It was my job to come up with policies and push things through and get things done. It was my job to sell projects, in a sense, so that we could make progress and keep moving forward. I've come to believe that not only is that the wrong approach, but it's an approach that starts from the wrong understanding of our places. If we can get out from behind our desks, go out into our cities, and actually humble ourselves to observe where people struggle, and then ask one simple question: what is the smallest thing that we can do right now to address that struggle? If we can do that day after day, year after year, week after week, month after month, what we will find is that not only are we making the highest returning investments that we can possibly make in our communities, we cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. And really, isn't that what we're all here to do? Thank you so very much.